So let me ask you a question, dear listener. When was the last time that you turned off your phone? And maybe it's not your phone, maybe it's a tablet, maybe it's these devices that live in our world. Turning off these devices can be hard because we have been conditioned to think that we have to have access to information and that people need to have access to us 24/7. And today we have Richard Simon with us, who wrote a book about this whole concept, the concept of unplugging. His book, Unplugged, How to Break Up with Your Phone and Reclaim Your Life, is definitely around the topic of moving offline. And I'm really happy to have him here to have a short conversation about not only the book, but about his story, which is also found in the book, how he turned off his phone for 365 days, which is quite a daunting task, but I'm really excited to talk about it. Richard, thank you for being here. Please let us know a little bit more about yourself, about your project, that long 365 days without a phone, and what's the book all about?
Jose, thank you so much for having me on. This is a real treat. For listeners, I mean, if you're listening to Jose's podcast, you know about Jose. Just so you know, in my book, I mean, many of you know Jose as the authoritative voice online for basic phones, but you might not know his personal story. So actually in my book, Unplug, you get Jose's personal story and how he got to this point. So that was a real treat. I really appreciated interviewing you, not just for your expertise, but also for your personal story as well. So thank you for all that you do. So in terms of my personal story, so I am a father, 3 kids. I live in Baltimore. I work at Georgetown Law in Washington, D.C. Not as a faculty member. I direct the website strategy for the law school. I've been there for 15 years. And in 2019, I had this impasse because my smartphone was really just frustrating me in so many ways. It was, putting a strain on so many facets of my life, from work to relationships to high quality leisure to investing in myself. And I realized that I really just needed to do something about it. So I tried so many different hacks that many of your listeners are familiar with. Digital Sabbath, deleting social media, grayscale, rubber band. Many of you have heard these before, and they just didn't work. And I realized that what I was doing, I was basically hacking it. As noble as many of these things are, I really was just trying shortcuts. So I realized I had to do something that was much more permanent. So I decided to do something drastic, which was turn off my smartphone altogether for the year, in what I've coined the off by default philosophy. There are 4 different breakup styles I talk about in the book. The one that I embraced was the off by default philosophy, and it was absolutely transformative. So that's sort of the backstory in terms of me.
The off by default philosophy can be daunting for a lot of people because, hey, I need my boss to contact me. What if there's an emergency and my family member needs to reach out? There are a lot of things that motivate us to not turn off our phones or any devices by that matter, even the television, right? Unplugging the television is a hard thing because, well, now what am I going to find in entertainment? How I'm going to create and find pockets of something that's valuable to me. And I read the book cover to cover. Great book. I really enjoyed it. And a lot of the stories showcase that, right? This fear, this friction, this idea. So walk me through some of these examples that can be helpful motivators and maybe cautionary tales for people about what are you actually missing in this world when you turn off your phone.
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, there's definitely fear, and there's also withdrawal going through this process. Everything we're talking about is really, really challenging. But the truth is, and I'm guessing you know this in your professional world too, Jose, is that change in life is really hard. It's really hard. I mean, so often we're looking for that 60-second YouTube clip that tells me how I can get fitter, or that 2-minute soundbite that can tell me how I can be better with time management, whatever it is. But that's just not how life works. Change in life is incredibly difficult. And with something that has a real behavioral addiction like a smartphone, You can't hack it. So yeah, so in particular, in terms of the off by default philosophy, let me first define it. So in my book, regardless of which one of the breakup styles you choose out of the four, I recommend 60 days. 60 days of having your smartphone off. The reason I say 60 and not something which is maybe a little bit sexier like 30, the reason why I say 60 is that pretty much everyone I interviewed and profiled in the book, including myself, went through withdrawal. Even with preparation. I have a whole section about preparation in the book. Even if you've established your support group, even if you got people on your side, you've communicated what's going on, you actually go through it, you do it, it's really scary. People go through anxiety, they go through headaches. I mean, this is like the real deal kind of package. So with the off by default approach, which is one of the 4 breakup styles, the definition is that you still have your smartphone with you. So let's say you go out to the zoo with your kids, or you go out to a restaurant with a date. You still have your smartphone. You're not getting rid of it, but you're just not turning it on. Now, the definition is the default mode for your phone is off, and the only time you turn it on is if there's an emergency, which means you're not going to turn on your phone. I mean, there might be like a 1 in a million shot that you have an actual emergency, but in life, what you'll learn, there really aren't that many true emergencies. What's nice about the off by default is that your loved ones, whether it be family, friends, colleagues, will know that if there's an emergency and you need to turn it on, you'll be able to turn it on. So let's say as a parent, your kid has to be taken to urgent care. All right, call your partner, call your spouse. If you are on the highway and you get a flat tire and you're pulled over, don't like walk to the nearest exit and walk for like miles and go to the rest stop, turn on your smartphone. Those are examples of emergencies. And what's so powerful about the off by default is that it recalibrates the reward pathways in your brain to not crave your smartphone, so that when you get past the 60 days, and if you do decide to reintegrate the smartphone, you can alter the definition of the off by default philosophy to, instead of only turning on your phone, if there's an emergency, you only turn on your phone to do something that will enhance your life. Now, if I were just to tell you, Jose, like, do off by default, like right now, let's say you were like a smartphone addict, which is what most of us like are, it wouldn't work. But once you go through detox and you've reset those reward pathways, you know what you don't want to do on your phone, and you know what you want to do on your phone. You're all of a sudden in control of it. So for me right now, in terms of where I am with my phone, what happened after the year, I only turn on my smartphone if there's something I absolutely need. So an example is last week, so I'm in Baltimore. The kids were off of school, between school and camp, and we went to Longwood Gardens. I hadn't turned on my phone for like 4 or 5 days, but we hit some traffic and I turned on my phone, smartphone, it's an iPhone, used GPS. We got to where we wanted to go, Longwood Gardens, beautiful gardens in Pennsylvania. And then what did I do when we pulled into the parking spot? I turned off my smartphone. Even after everything I've been through, even with this book, if I still had my smartphone on in my pocket, I knew I would be half there and half not there. So I think it's most powerful, the smartphone, when it's in an off mode. Similar to the television. You're talking about the television. When you're finished watching a show, you turn it off. You're not going to leave it on in the house all day. If you leave it on in the house all day, you're going to be like, oh, let's watch the next Netflix show, whatever it might be. So anyway, so that's like just an example. But yeah, the profiles, the stories of the book really help drive the narrative. And in the off by default section, I profile a law partner as well as a writer, a novelist in Vermont. So yeah, it's definitely one of the more interesting breakup styles.
It's very peculiar because for me, I know that I prefer the don't phone route, right? I prefer to have something that is simple. I don't have to think about it. There's no friction around this problem because I have a simple phone that does only very few things. And I was very happy to see that your book allows for more than that. Sometimes in the don't phone community, we can get a little bit tunnel vision, right? Because they are such powerful tools to re-embrace and to reintegrate into our lives. I was surprised to know and to see that in a lot of the profiles, a lot of the people that you interviewed, some of them went back, some of them decided to keep a smartphone, but keep it off most of the time. And some of them said, hey, I want this simple, simple life. But something that comes again and again for a lot of the listeners, a lot of the people, is just the idea of convenience, right? Well, yes, I could turn off my phone, but it's more convenient to keep it on and to have Spotify and to have, all of these other helpful, quote unquote, things that will allow me to live my life in the most amazing way. And only if I had more willpower, then I can just not install Instagram and not waste time on this or that. What would you say to somebody that tries to embrace the hard path of the willpower, the creating some of these things, instead of just adopting what you call a breakup style and just say, hey, I'm going to break up with this in a way that sustains my life?
I would say that there are some people in this world who can have control over their smartphones and get around it by, let's say, just deleting social media. I mean, it is certainly possible, but I think it's just too irresistible of a tool. I mean, if one of the first things I encourage people to do, as they're going through a preparation phase and they're starting to think about things more, is just go for a walk around the neighborhood for 60 minutes and don't bring your smartphone. I'd say even if you're part of the basic phone community, don't bring a basic phone either. Now, if you're living in like a city, let's say like New York City, where there might be safety concerns, like you're a single woman, like, all right, so if you want to bring your basic phone and your smartphone, fine, but put it in a purse or a backpack and leave it off. But I think in majority of cases, regardless where people live, I think it's okay to not bring a smartphone or a basic phone on a walk. And it's going to be really uncomfortable the first few times you do it. I mean, you're going to be in full on freak out mode because we are comfortable with being alone with our own emotions and thoughts. And when was the last time you went to a physician's office and we're in a waiting room and we're okay with not holding a phone? Like, when was the last time you were in the grocery store where you're waiting in line and you didn't take out your phone? Bathroom too. I mean, like all this stuff, like we are just so conditioned for all of these things. So I really would encourage people, like they're on the fence, they're really, struggling, or they're thinking about like, how can I, do something like this, is to take those initial steps. Go to a restaurant with a friend, leave it at home. You might be in the car and literally like in panic and sweats. That's what I was like. I was really sweating. My back was soaked the first time I went for a drive and didn't have GPS. I was freaking out. But like, you can do it. Like, it's absolutely possible. And same thing with the walk. After you do it the first few times, you're going to all of a sudden be like, all right, this is like my ritual. Like, this is what I need to do. So yeah, hacks and shortcuts, if it works for you, more power to you. I think for the majority of people, since the average American spends more than 5 hours a day on their smartphone, it's just time we can't get back, and just hacks don't cut it.
Something that I was quite interested in is on your religious background, right? Like, that you mentioned it a few times, like, that going to a religious service or having a day to focus on family, and this is something that a lot of Americans, whether they're religious or not, try to do during the weekend, right? Just having a day to say like, oh, I'm going to spend doing the chores of the house and reconnecting with my family. But most people just end up using that free time to be on their phones, to research more information, to overload their minds. And I was wondering how much of that religious perspective guided you, but also what could people do in order to protect, right? So in order to protect that time with family, that time with themselves, and not let those intrusive moments or thoughts overcome their actual values.
Yeah, that's a great question. So as you said, so I'm an Orthodox Jew, and Friday night to Saturday night, all technology is turned off. And I love that feeling even before my detox. Like, I absolutely love it. And I understood the value, but I also understood, like, because of that, being removed from technology for 24 hours a week, how dangerous of a tool it was. Like, before the completion of the Sabbath, we're literally talking like an hour or two before the completion, I could start to feel the dopamine rush. I could start to feel like, oh my gosh, like I'm going to be turning on my phone and I'm going to be seeing everything that's going on. And the first thing you do after the Sabbath is over is what do? You go right to the phone. Yeah, I talk about in the book how if you are addicted to cigarettes and you would stop smoking for 1 day a week, that's a very, very noble, but you're just gonna be hacking away the rest of the week. Because of the power of Sabbath and what I felt, I really wondered to myself, like, why can't I have this feeling throughout the week? I mean, there's professional responsibilities. I mean, I'm also a husband and father. I have to be responsible. I interview an on-call anesthesiologist for the book. Like probably the biggest extreme, someone who's saving lives and someone who doesn't own a personal smartphone. But that was the thing from a religious perspective I realized was that the feeling felt so good 1 day a week. I really wondered, how could I get this the rest of the week? And that was very, very powerful. In terms of family, I talk about a couple of things that would be, I think, interesting for listeners. One is that modeling the right behavior for loved ones. So, there's been, thankfully, the last year, a really strong movement, spurred in many ways by Jonathan Haidt's, blockbuster, The Anxious Generation. And it's interesting because, if you would have asked a parent like 2 weeks before Jonathan Haidt's book came out, could kids have phones in schools? They would say no. Could kids have smartphones? And they would say no. But Jonathan's book was such an authoritative piece, similar to you in terms of how you're the authoritative voice for basic phones. People they needed that. Like they needed that voice. So what's like the next step? And I'm hoping this is like where my book comes in, is that, I'm troubled by kids who leave school. And I see this because I have kids that I pick up from school. And what's the first thing the kids do when they leave school? They turn on their smartphones. Or what's the first thing kids see when they get in the car, a carpool? Parents looking down at their phones. Parents looking down at their phones at the kitchen table. Parents looking at their phones in the den. Parents looking at their phones when they are at a kid's baseball game and soccer game. So I'm hoping the next step to tackle as a family unit is modeling the right behavior. One of the ways of achieving that is setting up our homes in the proper way. And, one of the things when you go through a detox, and almost everyone in my profile in the book went through this, is that you're going to gravitate to other forms of high dopamine, like replacement activities, whether it be a computer, whether it be video games. So I think it's really important to set up the home environment in a way where, you don't have those temptations. So in the kitchen, there's no screens. That signals to you it's a place for eating. The bedroom, there's no screens. That's where you sleep. The den, that's where low dopamine activities happen. High quality activities like reading, like games. So where do the screens go? They go in like one room in the house. It could be in the basement, wherever it is. But there's that friction. It means you have to go down the steps to the basement to get there. Now, let's say you live in an apartment, a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment, or even a studio. I have a creative solution for those listeners, which is have a tent or set up sheets. And within that tent, within those sheets, that's where you do deep work. That's where you do your reading. That's where you do your work and your thinking. Outside of that tent, that's where all the craziness goes. You don't have a lot of space to work with, a lot of physical space. But whenever you go into what you'd consider that sacred space in terms of meditation, reflection, connection, it takes place in there. So even if you don't have a house, that's, I think, a good solution.
I actually love that suggestion, but I will invert it and I will say, hey, do all of the crazy stuff inside of the tent. Because I think of how tents work indoors, and that is that they get really hot. So you will be watching television on a tablet or something or whatever, and then it gets so hot that you're like, man, I don't want to do this anymore. And you get out of the tent and you go back to like low dopamine. So, but I love that idea. I 100% agree. I wrote something along these lines a few months and about 2 years ago on my Substack, where I talk about essentially, having a room that is protected from the internet, having spaces that are for only certain purposes. So, I live in a small apartment, two bedroom, 2 bath, and essentially the office is where everything is online and the bedroom is where everything is offline. So I have a chair in my bed, and in the living room, our living room is also very offline. And the only time that we watch something together is we don't have a television, we bring a projector. So you have to take out the projector and then like you have to project something. Right now we are switching, so we're waiting for a new projector to come in. But that's essentially how it works, right? So we have something that is a physical manifestation of I'm going to be entertained and I'm going to have fun and it's going to be great. But then I put it away and I have that physical separation. And I 100% believe that this is extremely important to have a room that is, hey, this room is fully online and this room is fully offline. And the 10th idea is, it's genius, especially if you have, a very small space that you will have to work with. Another thing that you mentioned in the book and, some of the profiles that I saw is that people really didn't miss much, even though they went on 60 days or like a little bit longer. I think you profiled at the beginning a baseball player, and he essentially said, hey, I got better at my craft, something that I really need to be focused on. And I have been reading recently some MLB clubs, teams, I guess, that they don't call them clubs, but the teams are starting to ban smartphones from the dugouts because they want more synergy among the players. Instead of them looking into their phones, they want people to be, hey, like we're here, we're in the game, we are together in this, and we're going to win. Except if you're the Colorado Rockies, because they lose pretty much every game. And, we're really ashamed right now because the streak is really bad. But do you get what I'm saying? So like,
Yeah.
walk me through a little bit more of that.
Yeah, Jose, they should recruit you as a consultant. That's the idea. That's the in. That's how the Rockies are gonna get turned around. Yeah, it's so true. I interviewed Nick Castellanos, who's a right fielder for the Philadelphia Phillies, and Nick, he turned off his smartphone, switched to a basic phone, but did something even more drastic, which was he totally started from scratch and just started with a totally new number. And yeah, I was so fascinated to hear because his 2021 season with the Cincinnati Reds, when he did this, was a career year for him. I mean, he started for the National League in the All-Star game. He won a Silver Slugger. I mean, it was like such a great year. And I had to ask him, I said, Nick, like, what were there any down points? You've been, he ended up, switching to a basic phone it was about, I think, 15, 16 months. It's like, were there any low points? And he said, he literally was quiet for like 30, 45 seconds. And he was like, think of one thing. And he said, when I was on the road and I was in the team hotel, it was after a game, it was around midnight, and room service had ended essentially at midnight. So he couldn't get any room service at the hotel. So he couldn't call down from his room phone. And he realized that because he didn't have a smartphone, he couldn't Uber Eats anything. So he took a deep breath. He was like, you know what? This is a good time in life to say it's okay to be hungry. And he went to sleep. And I'm like, wait, Nick, like, that's it? He's like, yeah, that's like the one story. So yeah, so we get so scared about doing something like this. And he did it for 16 months. And the only thing he could think about it because he couldn't Uber Eats. And it's the same thing for me. Like, people are like, what on earth happened when you turn back on your phone after 12 months? I didn't throw away my smartphone. I had it, with me. So it's been 12 months since I turned on my smartphone. And I turned it on after 12 months. I knew it was going to blow up because I had gotten so many emails from people who were like, where are you? Are you alive? And I was like, what's going to happen? And nothing happened. And the real reason why nothing happened is, I guess, when messages get sent and there's like no response and like it's a certain period of time, they just get lost in the digital ether. So if you look like at my text messages, you look at my WhatsApp, it was still December 31st, 2019. It was like nothing had happened over the course of the year. It's so interesting because like I was like scared almost. And I turned back on my phone, and we get scared for turning off for like 2 hours, forget about an entire year. And it was like I literally hadn't missed anything. And that I ran across the board in so many of the profiles that I did was that, we get really scared about something like this in terms of what will happen, how will it impact like relationships, how will it impact, my career. And what you realize is that like with something like this that is truly life enhancing, there really, really aren't that many down moments.
I'm glad you made sure that we picture that, because I think a lot of us think, and this happens in every area of life, we think that we're more important than we actually are. And I'm not trying to bring anyone's ego down. You are valued as a person. We are valued as people. But at the end of the day, if there is something that needs your attention, people will find a way to reach out to you. And I have found that to be 100% true. I've worked with different nonprofits over the last 5 years on multiple projects. Sometimes the projects are very connected and sometimes they're very community driven. So it's a lot of work in the, offline world. And I have found that I've never missed an appointment. I've never missed a very important call. And when people really needed something from me, they literally called me, they sent an email, they were relentlessly trying to get a hold of me. I remember one time, this is probably one time in the past 6 years that I have been on my journey of moving offline. The most important thing that happened was, I left my phone, or my phone had kind of like been off for some reason. And my wife called my coworker, and then my coworker came to my office and said, like, hey, your wife's trying to reach out to you. And that was it. I mean, it was kind of like not a big moment. There wasn't a big emergency. It was just like, hey, I really need this information kind of a thing. She was the doctor, I believe. And I was like, oh yeah, okay, sure. And then I think my phone was off charge. Like, I didn't have enough charge. So it kind of like turned off on its own. And that's it. Like, that's the major concern. Professionally, I haven't felt any difference. And I'm glad to see that there are other profiles in the book of people that say, my work got better, my life got better, and I am not tethered to this. Something similar happened to me recently, that I have been way less engaging on different platforms. I try to be as helpful as possible on the YouTube channel, on Reddit, on Discord. Those are the 3 platforms that I essentially give back to the community. But recently I stopped being super involved because there is this kind of like movement that tells me that we also need more time for ourselves. And this happened recently. This interview was supposed to happen 2 weeks ago, but I had to go to bury my grandfather. My grandfather passed. And while I was out there in Nicaragua, my home country, I just saw people walking the streets. I saw the same issues out there than in here. People being numbed by their devices, not spending time with their family, not being really interactive with each other. But I also saw something different that doesn't happen as often here in the United States, just because of how cities are laid out. And that is that people, though they are on their phones, they do have more social interactions, just because, I live in a city that is very compact and houses are like next to each other. So you get to see more people, you get to see more activity, things happening in the world. Whereas here in the United States, things are more spread out. Houses are over here and shops are over there, right? They're fully separated. In my country, everything is together. So you see more people, you see more activity, which I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing because you get to overhear conversations, or you get to be curious about somebody, or you get to interact in a random way. And while some people may find that annoying, I find it revealing that the way that we set up society is very isolating here in the United States. And it has been over the past 20 years. And more importantly, with the advent of the smartphone, it's more personalized. It's more about you and about what you're doing. As we start wrapping up, I have 2 more questions. And one of them is, how can I put into practice some of these teachings, some of these ideas, so that I can live a better life, so that I can be more social, even though that may be hard post-pandemic, post-COVID, as society is set up? It's more of like, go to work, go back, stay in your bubble, don't reach out. So what can I do to expand my horizons?
Yeah, that's a great question. Something I talk about deeply in the book is relationships. What you find when you ultimately break up with your phone, and the 4 breakup styles I talk about, which is ultimately, turning off your smartphone, and in your case, simplifying your phone, moving to a basic phone. Something I found was that, with texting becoming much more of a pain if you're in a basic phone, or the other breakup styles that not happening at all, you're going to have to end up investing more in the relationships you hold dearest. And what that basically looks like is, if you're using your smartphone heavily right now, and let's say you have 35, 40 existing text threads with various people, it could be more, that really is high frequency but low value communication. But when you ultimately embrace a more intentional life with your technology, texting fizzles out. It's just a reality. And when texting does fizzle out, what does that mean? A lot of those, I'm not going to say that they aren't meaningful relationships, but a lot of like friendships, they'll fizzle, and that's okay. But what will happen? The people who you hold dearest in terms of your circle, your dearest friends, your closest family, what's going to happen is high frequency, low effort communication is going to be out the door. And what's going to happen? It's going to be low frequency, but high quality communication is going to enter. And your friendships, they will be so strong as a part of this process, because if you don't invest in those relationships you hold dearest, then you're going to lose them. And you don't want that. And the person on the other end, if they really are a dear friend, wouldn't want that either. If you're someone who's dating, that's going to improve. Dating, when it comes to like texting and apps, can be really, really challenging. You remove texting from the equation and you're instead focusing on the real you in terms of communication. Something Sherry Turkle talks about, an MIT professor, conversation instead of mere connection. That is something that is so incredibly valuable. So in terms of relationships, I think it's a really, really big piece of the puzzle.
My final question before I give you a final word as well is in terms of rejecting the on culture. I think we have an on culture that requires us to be 24/7. What are other areas of life that you can also reject this culture? So we have the phone, which is a big portion, but what are some of the other areas that you can say, hey, I'm going to reject this cultural norm that is not helping my life to flourish?
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's related to the phone, but something I think is something we know all too well, especially in the States, is news and news content and consumption. So many of us, have turned into like members of the State Department, in a sense of like, we literally need to be on NewYorkTimes.com or CNN.com or Wall Street Journal, or name your news outlet, and have to be checking it constantly. And the thing is that the only person that benefits is the news site of the social media site you're using. So I think it is important to be informed, but something I talk about in the book is subscribe to a physical newspaper, whether it be the New York Times, whether it be the Wall Street Journal, whether it be the Denver Post, whether it be the Washington Post, wherever you lean politically, New York Post. And set up a ritual, ritualize it, and once a day, read that newspaper. That could be on the train, that could be a coffee at breakfast, that could be in the evening, whenever it is. And make that the one time you check news during the day. You will be so much calmer, and you'll also be so much better informed, because even though newspaper circulation is declining, there are still some really quality newspapers out there. So news content is something that I think has become so unbelievably toxic right now. So that's one area that I would say could really be a good focal point is, certainly we have the phones and all that, but how we consume news content.
Thank you for that. Richard, thank you very much for this conversation. It was a great book. I loved it. Highly recommend everyone who's listening to go grab a copy. There will be a link in the description of this podcast and to other, things that Richard does. He is buddies with Cal Newport as well, because you probably see him on a daily basis. I'm just kidding. I know Cal is also there in Georgetown, but different department, right? Such a massive area. But he did say something about your book and the cover, right? So I was glad to see that he at least got to see a little bit of the material, because I love his work, and I think he definitely needs a dumb phone. As much as he says that he loves his smartphone and stuff like that, he needs a dumb phone. But leave us with a final word, Richard. Thank you very much for being here. We appreciate your insights.
Thanks, Jose. Yeah, it's really a treat to be on. Yeah, there are so many pieces of this conversation that are so important. And I would just say, like, the one thing is that you talk about basic phones so much. You're the authoritative voice, and you're doing such a service for the community. But I would say one thing, and this is coming from a more faith-based side, which is that even if you have a basic phone, you can abuse it. Like, you really can abuse it. For something that has a lot of fun functionality, like your review of the cat, or something that is less functionality, like the Alcatel Flip. You like how I'm doing this? I'm dropping these names, Jose. TCL. Even if you have a basic phone, you can abuse it. So I would just say, like, you're a Jose Briones listener. You love his stuff, and that is such a good thing. But there's also, like, you need to be intentional with your basic phone, because even just in my community, I see them being abused, and these phones are dumbed down as much as possible. And I see people in cars texting and talking these dumb phones, these basic phones. So yeah, be as intentional as possible with it. And if you feel like with your basic phone that it's getting to be too much, I would strongly consider embracing a different breakup style, and then coming back to the basic phone once you've recalibrated those reward pathways. But yeah, I've seen that even if it might reduce screen time, they can still have really, really addictive attributes, and it can definitely be a constant companion.
I definitely agree with that. And I want to thank you for saying that, because you can be addicted to the information, to the texting, to all of it that is within the basic phone, because it is a communication piece at the end of the day. And I think that's quite important to remind ourselves that what we're looking for is a more serene life, a life that is well led, regardless of the device that we have in our pocket. Richard, thank you very much. Thank you, listeners, for taking the time today to check out this content, and go check out the book. I highly recommend that you read it. And honestly, it's one of those suggestions, as Richard said, to think of slower content. So instead of going into social media, instead of going into the post, into the rage out bait that we have in the web, to think of people who have dedicated time to craft a piece, whether it's a newsletter, whether it is a book, whether it is the newspaper, something that took time to actually process, instead of just a tweet that is an emotion in a moment. Again, thank you for listening to the podcast. There are links to support the podcast, to be able to stay tuned. If you found this podcast helpful, make sure to share with a friend. We love it when we get new people and asking questions and getting new guests. So thanks a lot for everything that you do for the community. And hopefully you found some value in today's podcast. You found something to be enjoyed. Again, we'll see you next time on the next episode.